Some stories don't begin with a scream, a gunshot, or a siren in the distance. Some begin with silence, the kind of silence that hangs heavy in the air, like fog in a forgotten graveyard. This is one of those stories. It's a story about a man who said nothing, a boy who saw everything, and a system that almost buried the truth. This is the trial of Jamal Everett, a 28-year-old black man accused of a violent robbery. But behind the cold steel of the courtroom, something far darker was unraveling, and it all began with a pair of shackles and a single glance across the room. The courtroom felt more like a morgue than a place of justice. Fluorescent lights flickered above, casting pale glows on the cracked linoleum floor. Dust floated lazily in the still air, disturbed only when someone shifted in the pews. The benches creaked as people leaned forward, hungry for drama. At the center, flanked by two armed deputies, sat Jamal Everett, wrists cuffed tightly, jaw clenched, eyes sunken. His expression betrayed no fear, no rage, just exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that comes not from lack of sleep, but from being hunted for far too long. Cameras clicked like insects. A local news anchor whispered into a microphone, her voice just audible. Day one of the Everett trial begins as the accused faces charges of aggravated assault and armed robbery. The prosecution is expected to lean heavily on testimony from decorated Officer Sergeant Darrell Knox. Jamal didn't move. He barely blinked. His eyes scanned the courtroom slowly, stopping when they met a pair of familiar eyes behind the gallery railing. His mother, Monica Johnson, sitting alone, dressed in dark blue, clutching her purse like a life raft. Beside her, her 5-year-old son, Caleb, sat swinging his legs, too young to understand the gravity of the moment. The bailiff's voice cracked like thunder. All rise for the Honorable Judge Teresa McMillan. Chair scraped. The judge entered, lips tight, eyes sharp behind her glasses. She glanced briefly at the defendant, then at the prosecutor. A tall man in a charcoal gray suit stepped forward, Eric Wallace, the assistant district attorney, known for his sharp tongue and impeccable conviction rate. His voice was smooth, but every syllable struck with precision. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, pacing slowly in front of them. On the evening of August 14th, at approximately 11:37 p.m., a violent robbery took place outside J&J's Liquor Mart on the corner of 5th and Maple. The victim, a 62-year-old store clerk, was beaten unconscious. The assailant took cash, a cell phone, and left the man with a fractured jaw and 3 broken ribs. He let the words linger. You will hear from our primary witness, Sergeant Darrell Knox, who pursued and arrested the suspect just blocks from the crime scene. The suspect was found in possession of a stolen wallet and a bloodied shirt. That suspect, he said, turning slowly toward the defendant's table, is sitting before you now. A quiet murmur rippled through the courtroom. The jury's eyes snapped to Jamal. Wallace continued, We will provide surveillance footage. We will present forensic evidence. And you will come to one conclusion, that the man in this courtroom is guilty beyond all reasonable doubt. No response came from the defense table. Lisa Monroe, a seasoned public defender with calm defiance in her posture, sat beside Jamal, her hands neatly folded. She said nothing yet. Not today. Today, the prosecution would perform. Jamal stared forward, still silent. The courtroom watched him like a zoo exhibit, expecting rage, resistance, perhaps even remorse. But he offered none. Just that same hollow stare. The first witness was called, Sergeant Darrell Knox. He took the stand with the ease of a man who had done this before. Uniform crisp, badge polished, voice steady. He spoke with the calm authority of someone who had nothing to fear. I was on patrol that night, he began, when I heard dispatch alert units of a 911 call from J&J's Liquor. I arrived at the scene minutes later. Victim was bleeding, barely conscious. A witness pointed toward a man running southbound. I pursued. Found the defendant near 8th and Coral. Shirt torn, blood visible. Took him into custody. Wallace smiled, almost smug. Was there any doubt in your mind, Officer Knox, that this was your suspect? None, he replied. He matched the description, he ran, and he was carrying a wallet belonging to the victim. The jury nodded. The puzzle pieces were clicking into place. Or so it seemed. At the back of the room, Caleb swung his legs again, watching the officer intently. No one noticed. Just a little boy in a sea of adults too certain of their own narratives. When recess was called, Monica rose slowly, leading her son out by the hand. Jamal looked up just before they exited, and for the first time all morning, his expression shifted. Just a flicker. His eyes met hers. Then Caleb's. And in that moment, behind the cold steel barrier, between the guards and the stairs, he seemed to say something without words. I didn't do this. But no one heard it. No one cared. Not yet. Outside the courthouse, the headlines were already writing themselves. Suspect caught red-handed. Justice served swiftly. Police hero to testify in high-profile case. But inside, under the flickering lights and watchful eyes, something else had already begun. And the truth, the real truth, was about to be cracked open by the last person anyone expected. In a courtroom where justice is a game of perception, reputation is often more powerful than evidence. And in Eastbridge, no reputation loomed larger than that of Sergeant Darrell Knox. For 20 years, he had patrolled the toughest streets in the city. From gang shootouts in Claymore Alley to domestic standoffs on Jefferson Boulevard. His name had become synonymous with bravery, a man who never blinked in the face of danger, who once pulled a child from a burning car, and who'd been shot twice in the line of duty. He didn't just wear a badge. He wore a legend. There was a framed plaque at Eastbridge Precinct that read Hero in blue. His picture hung below it, smiling proudly in uniform. He had received 2 Medals of Valor, a city service commendation, and even a feature in the local paper titled, "The Man Who Made the Streets Safer." So when he raised his right hand and took the oath in front of the jury, no one doubted him. Not the judge, not the prosecutor, not even the jury, and certainly not the press, who whispered his name like he was the second coming of justice. Sergeant Knox stood straight on the witness stand, his posture sharp, eyes unwavering. He didn't look nervous. He looked like a man who'd done this before and won. "I remember the night clearly," he said, his voice even, practiced. "We received a call, possible robbery in progress, at J&J's. I arrived in under 3 minutes. Found the clerk on the sidewalk, bleeding heavily. The witness described a male, African American, mid to late 20s, gray hoodie, limping, heading south." He paused, scanning the jury. "I located the suspect, Mr. Everett, just 2 blocks away. He matched the description. When I called out, he ran. That's when I gave chase." Eric Wallace leaned on the rail, arms crossed. "And what happened then, Sergeant?" "I apprehended the suspect near Coral Street. He was in possession of the victim's wallet. His shirt had blood on it. He resisted. I had to use force to bring him down." He turned slightly toward the jury. "Let me be clear, in my 20 years, I've made a lot of arrests. But this one was open and shut." A murmur rippled through the courtroom again. Jurors scribbled notes. Some nodded. The picture was becoming clear. Too clear. The man with the badge had spoken. And who were they to question a hero? But not everyone was convinced. At the back of the courtroom, Monica Johnson sat quietly, her face pale beneath the dim lights. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her son's. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She only stared at Knox, at Jamal, and occasionally at the floor, as though trying to piece together something broken. Her son, Caleb, sat beside her, his legs no longer swinging. His small fingers were laced tightly with hers, but his eyes weren't on his mother, or the judge, or the prosecutor. They were locked on Sergeant Knox. While everyone else listened to his words, Caleb was watching how he said them. The slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. The way his eyes darted for a split second before answering a question. The faint tap of his index finger against the side of the witness box, like a metronome ticking in his own mind. It was nothing anyone else would notice. But Caleb wasn't just any observer. He was 5 years old. He didn't understand legal terms or courtroom decorum. But he understood one thing with absolute clarity. When grown-ups lied, he had seen it before. In church, at school, at playgrounds where bullies cried crocodile tears and teachers nodded along. And now, as the so-called hero of Eastbridge spoke like a man sure of his truth, Caleb's eyes narrowed. No one was watching the boy. They rarely did. But he was watching everyone. As Knox wrapped up his testimony, he glanced at the defense table. Jamal didn't return the look. He kept his head down. Not in shame, but in resignation. As if he knew the power of a decorated uniform and a tight narrative. He had no evidence to fight that. Only his word, and no one in the room seemed interested in hearing it. Monica exhaled slowly, her grip on her son tightening. She wanted to scream, to stand up and tell them they were wrong. But what would it change? They had their story. A fallen officer's legacy was not something the system was eager to interrogate. Judge McMillan called for a 10-minute recess. The jurors stood and filed out. The press gathered in the lobby. And behind them all, a 5-year-old boy turned to his mother and whispered, "He's lying." Monica froze. Caleb looked back at the witness stand. And for the first time, she didn't see a boy. She saw a witness. One the courtroom hadn't counted on. One they were about to overlook. But that would soon change. Courtrooms are places built on testimony. On the weight of words, sworn and echoed under oath. But sometimes the most important testimony comes not from the witness stand, but from a child too young to raise his hand. It was a Wednesday afternoon. The trial was halfway through. The prosecution had presented its version of events like clockwork. Sergeant Knox, the store clerk, a forensic analyst confirming the bloodstains matched the victims. Piece by piece, they were building a wall. And behind it sat Jamal Everett, silent, motionless, caged. During the recess, Monica sat on a bench just outside the courtroom, eyes glazed, hands trembling, her son Caleb tucked quietly by her side. The hallway buzzed with chatter, reporters making notes, court staff shuffling case files, attorneys pacing in circles. But amid all that noise, a small voice cut through. "Mommy," Caleb whispered, tugging gently at her sleeve. "I saw that man the night Jamal got hurt." Monica froze. She turned to face her son, heart pounding. "What you mean, baby?" Caleb didn't blink. His voice remained soft, matter-of-fact, the way only a child tells the truth. The man with the shiny watch. He was there. By the alley. He yelled at Jamal. Monica's stomach flipped. Her breath caught in her throat. 1,000 thoughts rushed through her mind at once. Could he be remembering wrong? Could it be something he saw on the news? Or was it possible her son had witnessed part of the incident? That night, she had taken Caleb to J&J's for a late-night snack. It was around 9:30. She remembered buying a soda and a snack cake. Caleb had asked to wait outside. She'd agreed, only for a moment. When she came out, the sirens were already echoing. She hadn't seen anything. But Caleb had been standing by the side railing. Could he have seen more? And if so, why hadn't he said anything before? She looked at him, studying his face, the quiet seriousness, the certainty in his eyes. "Are you sure?" she asked gently. Caleb nodded. He had a shiny watch. It blinked when the streetlight hit it. Monica felt her heart twist. The detail that small, strange, precise detail made it all too real. The courtroom was no place for a child. But now, he might be the only one who could shatter the lie. She hesitated. If she brought this up, would they even believe him? A 5-year-old boy versus a 20-year veteran? She glanced back toward the courtroom doors. Time was running out. When the trial resumed, the defense seemed deflated. Jamal's attorney, Robert Gaines, had little to cross-examine. The judge was visibly impatient. The jurors were settling into their conclusions. Everything felt predetermined. But then something happened. Caleb stood up. No one noticed at first. He had wriggled away from his mother's grasp and climbed onto the wooden bench, trying to make himself taller, his small face drawn tight in concentration. He pointed a finger straight toward the witness stand. At Sergeant Knox. "That's him," Caleb said. "I saw him. He was yelling. And he had the shiny watch." The words echoed through the room like a dropped pin in a cathedral. A beat of stunned silence followed. Then chaos. People turned, reporters leaned forward, the judge banged his gavel. Monica reached for her son, trying to pull him back down, but was too late. The statement had been made. The words had landed. Sergeant Knox's face tightened. He turned sharply toward Caleb, his lips pressing into a hard line. The prosecutor, Eric Wallace, stood frozen. And across the aisle, defense attorney Lisa Monroe, second chair, mostly quiet until now, suddenly came to life. She leaned over, whispering urgently to Gaines, then rose and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, we request a sidebar." The room buzzed with anticipation. No one knew what to make of the interruption. The judge huddled with both attorneys at the bench, voices low and heated. A child witness was highly irregular. But if there was even a chance his testimony could challenge the narrative. Minutes later, the court recessed again, but this time under tension. Monica sat on the edge of the bench, arms wrapped around Caleb, whispering soothing words. He wasn't scared, just confused by all the noise. Lisa Monroe approached gently, kneeling to Caleb's level. "Hey, buddy," she said softly. "That shiny watch, did you see it before?" Caleb nodded. "It blinked like this," he said, flicking his wrist. Monroe turned to Monica. "Did Sergeant Knox come to your house after the arrest?" Monica blinked. "Yes, why?" Monroe's jaw clenched. "Did he wear a watch then?" "I think so." "Why?" But Monroe was already pulling out her notebook. In her mind, things were falling into place. Caleb hadn't just seen something. He had seen something they had missed. Or maybe something they had been told not to see. And if that was true, the legend of East Bridge's perfect officer was about to crack. Because in a courtroom full of adults, the only one telling the truth was a child nobody had thought to ask. A courtroom is a stage where confidence wins as much as truth. And Eric Wallace, sharp, seasoned, and articulate, had no intention of letting a child unravel his perfect case. The moment Caleb's words echoed through the chamber, Wallace stood up, clearing his throat with deliberate contempt. He turned to the judge, then to the jury, and finally to the gallery, where Caleb now sat in his mother's arms. A 5-year-old, he began, pacing slowly. "Ladies and gentlemen, 5 years old." He let the silence hang. "We are to believe that a kindergartner, in the dark at a distance, amid chaos, has not only identified an adult male, but remembered the color of a trash can and the reflection of a wristwatch?" There were faint murmurs of agreement in the room. Some jurors shifted. One woman shook her head subtly. Wallace had done this dance before: discredit, diminish, dismiss. But then, Caleb spoke again. He wasn't on the stand. No oath had been taken. But his voice, soft, clear, and unwavering, broke through the murmuring. "It was a big red trash can," he said, "and the man stood right next to it. His watch kept blinking. It was bright." The room fell quiet. Wallace hesitated. A courtroom is trained to ignore what's not on the record. But sometimes, what's said outside the lines rings louder than what's written in them. Defense attorney Lisa Monroe rose. She didn't look toward Caleb. She didn't need to. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "we request an adjournment to verify the child's statement." Judge Raymond Dalton narrowed his eyes. He didn't like disruptions. But even he knew that the tiniest seed of doubt could split a verdict wide open. Wallace objected. "The testimony is hearsay. There's no way to verify." Monroe cut him off, still calm. "If he's mistaken, we lose nothing. But if he's telling the truth, then the entire foundation of the prosecution's case may be compromised. We ask for 24 hours. After a long pause, the judge relented. Motion granted. Recess until tomorrow morning. And just like that, a crack had formed. It wasn't big, but it was there. As the courtroom emptied, Wallace walked stiffly past Monroe, jaw tight. Behind him, Sergeant Knox sat still, staring at nothing. his expression unreadable. Outside the courthouse, a cold wind had picked up. Monica pulled her coat tight around Caleb as they descended the marble steps. Reporters swarmed, some asking questions, others just snapping photos. Lisa caught up with them quickly. "Go straight home," she said quietly. "I'm putting in a request for protection detail, just in case." Monica nodded, already feeling something in her stomach she couldn't quite name. An unease. The kind that doesn't come from fear, but from being watched. That night, things didn't feel normal. She turned the lock 3 times. Drew the curtains. Left the kitchen light on. Caleb was asleep by 8 o'clock, clutching his favorite dinosaur plush. Monica sat on the couch, flipping channels without watching, mind replaying every word her son had said. Then the headlights came. She noticed them around 10:30 p.m. A car, parked across the street. No engine sound. No movement. At first she thought it was a neighbor, but 20 minutes passed, then an hour. Still there. She moved to the side window, peeking through the blinds. The car had tinted windows. She couldn't see who was inside. But it wasn't just parked. It was pointed directly at her house. Her pulse quickened. She stepped back, heart thudding. Was she being paranoid? Or was someone making sure she stayed quiet? She picked up her phone, fingers hovering over Lisa's number. Then the car started. The engine revved softly. The headlights dimmed, and the car slowly rolled away, disappearing down the hill like a shadow slipping through the dark. The next morning, Lisa Monroe was already waiting at the courthouse. Alongside her stood Detective Carla Simmons, Internal Affairs. Carla wasn't part of the original investigation. That was the point. She'd been called in after a quiet request from the defense just hours earlier. And now she stood tall and sharp in a gray blazer, eyes scanning the courtroom as if it were a puzzle waiting to be solved. Lisa briefed her quickly. "We need verification, the location of the trash, Ken, the line of sight from the store, the lighting, and most importantly," she paused, "whether or not Sergeant Knox had any reason to be there that night before backup was called." Carla nodded. "I'll start with security footage, patrol logs, and the street cam database. If that kid's memory is right, we're about to open a door someone's tried very hard to keep shut." As the trial resumed, Wallace looked tired, a little less sure. But Knox? He looked straight ahead, stone-faced, silent, still the perfect officer. But now the badge on his chest was beginning to glint under a different kind of light. And this time, it wasn't from a wristwatch. It was from the heat of scrutiny. And doubt, once it takes root, doesn't fade quietly. It grows. Truth doesn't always scream. Sometimes it hums softly in the background, in a flicker of light. A skip timestamp, a shadow in the corner of a screen. Carla Simmons knew this better than most. Her job wasn't to believe, it was to verify. And right now, she was staring at a digital maze of street cam footage, GPS logs, and redacted patrol routes, all centering around one name, Sergeant Darrell Knox. Assistant District Attorney Thomas Blake stood behind her, arms folded, brow furrowed. He didn't like messy surprises. And this was becoming a very messy one. "Camera at 5th and Rowley has low resolution," Carla muttered. "But watch this." She slowed the footage frame by frame. Night. Rain drizzled faintly, making the intersection glisten. A shadow moved, tall, bulky. No face. Just the shape. And then it flashed. A glint of light. It wasn't a headlight. Not a phone. It pulsed briefly under the street lamp. Silver, rhythmic. "Reflection," Blake said, leaning in. Carla nodded. "Exactly. Same timing Caleb described. Watch position, right by the large commercial bin. Red. Same one the cleaning crews use outside Parsons Market." She brought up another window, the patrol GPS. Knox had claimed he wasn't near that location until 11:46 p.m. when he responded to the dispatch call. But his cruiser's GPS showed a short, undocumented stop, 5 blocks south, at 11:17 p.m. Right beside Parsons Market. He was there, Carla said, before any call came in. And he didn't report it. Blake exhaled slowly. That's obstruction, at best. But it wasn't the only inconsistency. Carla opened another tab, bank records. Obtained quietly, without a warrant yet. Just preliminary analysis. Several wire transfers, all small. Spaced out over 8 months. All from the same source, M&D Grocery Distributors. It wasn't a huge name, just a mid-sized supplier. But one of its partners owned a liquor store that had recently been raided during the very incident that Jamal Everett was allegedly involved in. And suddenly, the narrative shifted. Because if Knox had ties to the store, and Jamal was just there, then maybe the officer had more to hide than just a badge. Meanwhile, across town, Monica Everett wasn't sleeping. She hadn't slept much in days. She'd pushed the couch against the front door, set up makeshift locks with chairs, checked every window twice, then 3 times. But none of that prepared her for the sound at 2:43 a.m. It wasn't a knock. It was a slam. A fist. Heavy. Fast. Against the wood. Once. Twice. Then silence. She froze. Caleb stirred in the next room, mumbling in his sleep. Monica didn't move. Didn't breathe. She waited, phone in hand, heart racing, every muscle tight. Then it came again, bam, 3 loud hits. Like someone testing the hinges. Then, silence. No footsteps. No retreat. Just absence. By the time police arrived, the street was empty. No sign of a car. No one in sight. Just a dent in the wood and her rising dread. That morning, Monica made a decision. No more waiting. She dressed Caleb, packed a small bag, and drove across town. Straight to a place she had avoided for years, the Eastbridge Courier's office. A local paper. Small, underfunded. But stubborn. She walked in, without an appointment. Her voice trembled as she introduced herself, asked to speak with an editor. She didn't bring evidence. Just a story. And the story was fire. A mother, a child witness, a decorated officer, and a system closing ranks. The Courier's editor, Dana Levins, listened without interrupting. Took notes in silence. Then nodded. "We'll look into it," she said softly. "But once we publish, there's no turning back." Monica didn't hesitate. "Then start writing," she whispered. Outside, the clouds gathered once more over Eastbridge. The storm hadn't ended. It was only beginning. Desperation is a quiet thing until it erupts. Sergeant Darrell Knox had built his reputation like a fortress, 20 years, medals, a flawless public record. But now, the cracks were showing, and he could feel the walls closing in. For the first time in his career, someone was watching him, scrutinizing his every step. And worse, it wasn't some lawyer in a suit. It was a child. Knox had underestimated the boy and his mother. Now they were becoming a threat. Late one evening, Monica Everett left the Eastbridge Public Library after meeting a local journalist. Caleb sat in the back seat, humming softly, drawing in a sketchbook. Monica started the engine, glanced in the rearview mirror, and froze. A black SUV was parked across the street. Engine running. No headlights. Just waiting. She pulled out slowly. The SUV didn't move. She turned left at the light. It followed. 4 or 5 blocks, she tested it, switching lanes, doubling back, skipping her usual turns. It stayed behind her. Steady. Cold. At the corner of Hayworth and Crestview, panic set in. Monica's fingers trembled on the wheel. She turned sharply onto a side street, too sharply, and her tires skidded. The car jolted over the curb, narrowly missing a fire hydrant. The SUV kept going. Didn't stop. Didn't help. It had made its point. Later that night, back at her sister's house, Monica didn't sleep. Again. She sat on the kitchen floor with a baseball bat across her knees, eyes fixed on the front door. Knox was watching. He was losing control, and desperate men are dangerous. At the same time, in a quiet office buried inside the district attorney's wing, ADA Thomas Blake stared at a stack of old case files. The pattern was impossible to ignore. A string of convictions over the past 10 years, all involving Sergeant Knox as the lead arresting officer. Different victims, different charges, but always the same structure. Thin evidence, no physical proof, a confession made under pressure, and Knox's name, printed cleanly across the front page of every report. It wasn't proof of wrongdoing, but it was Goff. Blake handed the files to Lisa Monroe. "I don't believe in coincidence," she said, scanning the first one. "Especially not when someone builds a career on them." Lisa knew what she had to do. This wasn't just about Jamal anymore. It was about a system built around fear, silence, and unchecked authority. And now, that system was cracking. Outside the courthouse, something unexpected was happening. Public interest. The local news had picked up Monica's story. The East Bridge Courier ran a front-page spread titled, "Truth from the Mouth of a Child." Online, the story exploded. Social media feeds filled with Caleb's courtroom outburst, now viral. He had a shiny watch, and he was right there. People didn't know what to believe, but they knew how to feel. Angry, curious, suspicious. Talk shows began questioning Knox's role in past arrests. Activist groups demanded an independent review. Posters appeared around Eastbridge with Caleb's drawing of the red bin and shining watch, now an eerie symbol of quiet defiance. One headline read, "A 5-year-old doing what grown men won't." Inside the DA's office, Lisa Monroe was silent. She had a witness. A shaky timeline. A broken narrative. But what she needed now was a turning point. A moment to flip the script. And in her mind, she was already building it. The next court session would not be business as usual. It would be war. The courtroom was silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from routine or respect, but the sharp, breath-holding stillness that only arrives when something big is about to happen. Lisa Monroe stood at the center of it all, her voice clear, calm, and slow, the way someone speaks when they already know they've won. She held up the first exhibit, a grainy surveillance still from the night of the assault. At first glance, it seemed useless. Blurry, dim, unreliable. But Monroe pointed to a small corner near the trash bins behind Linton's grocery. A sliver of light, not from a street lamp, but from something metallic. Then she placed the second exhibit beside it, a high-resolution close-up, pulled from the same feed, digitally enhanced by the forensics lab. The image was clearer now. A wrist, a watch, reflected light, and a uniform sleeve, Regulation Eastbridge PD. Gasps rippled across the courtroom. The third exhibit was the GPS data from Sergeant Knox's patrol vehicle, showing his cruiser idling near Linton's grocery at precisely the time he claimed to be miles away, assisting a traffic stop on 8th Street. Then came Caleb's testimony. Not from the boy himself. He had already done enough. But from a sworn deposition. Carefully transcribed, his exact words read aloud. He stood by the red trash bin. His watch was really shiny. It looked like a flashlight on his hand. Sergeant Knox sat rigid in his chair, jaw clenched. Sweat forming on his temples. Lisa turned toward him slowly. And then, piece by piece, she began to dismantle his original testimony. One contradiction at a time. He said he responded to a 911 call, but no such call existed. He said he found Jamal fleeing the scene, but security footage showed no one fleeing, only a man already injured and unconscious. He said his camera malfunctioned, but Carla Simmons discovered its footage had been wiped manually less than 30 minutes after the arrest. The lie was crumbling. All eyes turned to Knox. Prosecutor Eric Wallace shifted uncomfortably. He had been so certain. So confident. But now, with each fact Monroe laid bare, his faith in the case cracked like glass under pressure. Then came the final blow. Monroe introduced banking records, tracing a payment made to Knox's personal account 2 days before the arrest. The sender, Gerald Baines, owner of the electronics store allegedly robbed. It was over. Lisa paused. And then, in a voice that felt like thunder in a canyon, she said, "Your Honor, the defense moves to dismiss all charges against Mr. Everett and requests immediate action regarding Sergeant Knox's conduct under oath." Judge Albright, stone-faced, nodded once. Before he could speak further, Knox suddenly stood up. His voice broke the silence, frantic, hoarse. "They're lying. He was there. That kid, he didn't see. He doesn't know anything." He stepped back from the defense table, stumbling toward the exit. Two bailiffs moved swiftly. "Stand down, Sergeant Knox." He didn't listen. He made it 3 steps before he was tackled to the ground, face pressed to the polished courtroom floor. The gavel struck once, then twice. "Order. This court finds all charges against Mr. Jamal Everett to be unfounded and hereby dismissed. Mr. Everett, you are free to go." For a moment no one moved. And then came the sound. Not cheering, not shouting, just a soft, rising wave of clapping. Polite, controlled, but deeply emotional. Jamal's mother broke down in tears, gripping her son like she would never let go. Lisa Monroe closed her folder. Across the courtroom, Caleb looked up at his mother. She bent down and whispered something into his ear. He smiled, small but sure. Outside, the press waited like a tide. Monica stood behind a row of microphones, her hair pulled back, her eyes tired, but shining with something new: peace. She didn't speak long. Just one sentence. "Never believe a small voice can't change the truth." And that was it. The story of Jamal Everett wasn't just a courtroom drama. It was a reminder that justice, when buried, can still be uncovered. That silence isn't the absence of resistance. It's often the calm before the storm. And that sometimes the truth doesn't come from a badge or a lawyer. It comes from a 5-year-old boy holding a crayon and remembering what adults forgot to see. If this story moved you, if you believe in uncovering the hidden layers of justice, subscribe to Trial Tales. Every week, we bring you real courtroom stories, unraveling power, truth, and the people brave enough to stand up when no one else will. Because sometimes, the smallest voices carry the loudest echoes. Follow. Subscribe. Stay curious. Justice has many faces. Let's uncover them together.